Good afternoon. It is the afternoon of Tuesday, August 6th, and we hope that we're coming through to you this week on Unbound Radio. We're hoping for a confirmation that the sound is actually working in contrast to the previous week. I'm just going to take a wager that it is working. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C., making the best of things as much as I can, and hoping for confirmation. But if not, okay, let me just start off. As we go towards the autumn, the programmatic issues are going to come front and center. The fight against deadly austerity, the killer cuts, the genocidal budget demolition, which is pursued by austerity ghouls, by reactionary Republicans, and by the Wall Street Democrats, of course, in their own way, a softer way, but sometimes more effective. We're going to be looking at these fights about austerity. This afternoon, just by coincidence maybe, we had a big freakout on Fox News channel on the America Live program. They have picked up a tape of Congressman Keith Ellison talking about a very timid, very mild version of the Wall Street sales tax, something that he calls the transaction tax. And the transaction tax, of course, is a minuscule amount. It's in the tenths of a percent. It's hardly noticeable. And unfortunately, the money is all earmarked for projects. I'm sure it's earmarked for the polar bears, the penguins, and the pelicans, and other such uses. Right? Give it all to the World Wildlife Fund, I guess, is the idea with their version. But that's not the version we're talking about here. Here we're talking about the blue-collar populist version, which is that money goes in to the U.S. Treasury, and it's available there for public use. And the main purpose is to prevent genocidal austerity cuts. So they have a little tape of Congressman Ellison, right, of Minnesota. I think he's the head or one of the heads of the Progressive Caucus of the Democratic Party, and he's giving a rap about what he calls the transaction tax. And he says the problem in the United States is there's plenty of money. It's just that the money is all in the wrong hands. Some of it needs to be transferred to the government. What could be more anodyne than that? What could be more bland, right? That if certain groups in the society have been getting away with murder, not paying their taxes, then they should pay them, right? A little bit like the nobility under the French Revolution pre-1789, right? They paid no tax, so change that, right? It's just equity. It's just fairness. But, of course, the panel of experts on the Fox News channel were all agreed that was communism, socialism, the end of the world, what have you. And it just goes to show. Now, again, the problems that we see with the transaction tax, the Robin Hood tax, whatever you want to call it, those are addressed in our proposal, right? Our proposal is much better. And we'll just give you a little outline of that in a minute when we return on the Webster Tarpley Program. Welcome back to the Webster Tarpley Program here on Unbound Radio. Again, it's the afternoon of Tuesday, the 6th of August, a little bit after 4 o'clock in the afternoon here in the East. Now, remember, the 100% acceptable version is called the Wall Street sales tax. The name tells you what it is. A transaction tax could make people think that they're going to be taxed on taking money out of their ATMs. No, no, and no. It's the Wall Street sales tax. It's Wall Street being forced to pay a sales tax. You know what a sales tax is because you pay it. Even this woman on Fox News in the past hour I think her name is Kohn, Kohn, or something like this. She was able to put together that if you go out and buy a package of chewing gum, you will pay more sales tax on that pack of chewing gum than Wall Street pays in a year. Now, unfortunately, she couldn't quite pull herself together to say sales tax, but she did say you will pay more tax on that chewing gum than Wall Street pays in a year. But it's not on individual transactions. There is a $1 million exclusion, and that means every person can do $1 million of buying and selling. Every person, right? That means a family of 2 or 3, whatever it is, $1 million per person each. Each family gets $2-3 million under these circumstances in some cases, right? If you've got a big family, you might get $10 million excluded for the family. But the idea, therefore, is that the little people will not be hit hard with this, but the flash traders, program traders, high-frequency traders, they will assuredly be hit hard. Quite a few of them will be put out of business, and that's a good thing because speculation is an evil. The casino economy, the over-financialization, all these Wall Street protesters, right? Occupy. Occupy is fine, but the occupation is over and no permanent effects. No permanent damage to Wall Street has been done. So try tax Wall Street. Tax Wall Street is better than Occupy Wall Street because it hits them where they live, right? As we say, in the labanza. That means in the pocketbook, right? It gets them in terms of the values that they hold most dear. So keep pushing ahead with that. And we'll have more to say about the various monstrosities being cooked up. We try to talk a little bit about Obamacare and the budget battles in the second segment. But now look, we have this U.S. alert, right? These 22 countries where the U.S. embassy is closed. We got a worldwide travel alert for U.S. travelers. What is happening? My estimate is that with or without CIA support, backing, approval, whatever you want to call it, with or without that CIA role, the Muslim Brotherhood had designed some kind of a global summer offensive for the year 2013, which was going to include the consolidation of their dictatorship in Egypt around Morsi, a possible attack on Ethiopia by Egypt, taking the form of promoting a death squad uprising in Ethiopia along the lines of what we've seen in Libya and in Syria, and that's what they talked about. Right? Morsi's backers talked about that on television, that the way they would deal with the Ethiopian attempt to build the dam on the Blue Nile was to foment a national, a local Islamist emir operation to try to shut down that construction. Right? So what you would have seen would have been not so much an Egyptian military attack on Ethiopia, although that is also discussed, right? Bombing, certainly discussed, but the main thing would have been a guerrilla war by Islamists breaking out in Ethiopia. The country, of course, is Christian. That's the peculiarity of Ethiopia in that part of the world. And the Egyptians were engaged under Morsi. The Morsi group was engaged in an attack on Syria, a jihad against Syria. And we would have had, at the same time of foreign adventurism, we would have had the emergence of the Islamic Emirate of North Sinai with death squad participants from all over the place, right? We know the whole drill, right? We've seen it in Syria. And that Islamic Emirate of the Northern Sinai would have been the made-to-order pretext for NATO to begin seizing control of the Suez Canal, undoing what the great President Gamal Abdel Nasser, the true terror of imperialism in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, what he was able to do when he nationalized the Suez Canal and kicked out the British. Quite an achievement when you're able to do that, right? We should admire Nasser. And, of course, the people around Morsi are the people, the Nasser haters, right? They're the people who were used against him. And that goes back to this guy, Qutb, Qutb, the Qutbi, the Qutbi party. That's sort of the theoretical matrix for that Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood. So the summer offensive would have been dictatorship in Egypt, guerrilla warfare in Ethiopia, jihad against Syria, Sinai Peninsula in flames with emirs popping up all over the place. At the same time as we've seen the assassination of the top Libyan Nasserist leader Mesmari and the assassination of the top Tunisian Nasserist leader Brahmi, coming on the heels of the previous assassination of Belaid back 6 months ago. And big campaign of Al-Qaeda car bombs in Iraq. Lots and lots of people killed, generally at Shiite sites. Now, we're coming to the end of the Ramadan, right? We're going to have Eid al-Fitr here in a couple of days. So somehow this was supposed to occur around now. Fortunately, from the point of view of the world, this offensive is broken-backed. This is a broken-backed offensive at this point because the centerpiece of the thing has been removed thanks to General Sisi and the Egyptian army. Their counter-coup essentially blocked the centerpiece of this monstrous project, which undoubtedly reaches farther than I've said. In other words, what the U.S. is responding to, at least under one interpretation, right, the worldwide terror alert, this may actually be based on something real. It's something that the CIA and other agencies have, of course, been sponsoring. But the scope of what the Muslim Brotherhood is trying to do right now, may go beyond anything that the CIA wanted. Right? It's always the Frankenstein principle, right? The British and the and others, right, support Hitler. They help put Hitler into power. But once Hitler gets going and gets enough power, he turns on them. The Frankenstein monster principle in world politics, right? You create something to attack somebody else, it then turns on you. And this is inherent in this sort of scheming approach to world affairs. So in the middle of all this, we've got the new Egypt, I would say. This is now the new Egypt. This is quite possibly the second revolution, right? In France, you know, the first revolution, July 1789. The second revolution comes August 1792, 1793, some would say. There's a second phase in Russia. It's the February Revolution, and then it's the October Revolution some months later. But the idea of a double rhythm, right, that there are two key revolutionary points. General Sisi is obviously an extraordinary individual. Let's take a look. The Washington Post of Sunday, August 4th, day before yesterday. Harsh words for the U.S. from Egypt. You turned your back on the Egyptians, and they won't forget that, says Sisi to Lali Weymouth of the outgoing family that has owned the Washington Post, but will no longer, according to what we're told this morning. The leader of the Egyptian military criticizes the U.S. stance. Any dummy who says that this coup was ordered by the U.S. had better take all of what I'm going to say now, put this in your pipe and smoke it and see what you get. Morsi is angry at the U.S. He says, you left the Egyptians in the lurch, I would say. You turned your back on the Egyptians, and they won't forget that. Now you want to continue to turn your back on the Egyptians? Have you seen the scores of millions of Egyptians calling for change in Tahrir? What is your response to that? He says that Sisi puts the turnout on the 26th of July, interesting date, at 30 million people in the streets demanding the continuation of the ouster of Morsi and supporting the military. Most interesting for our purposes is Sisi's critique of the Muslim Brotherhood. He says, why did Morsi fail? The dilemma between Morsi and the people, the split between Morsi and the people, originated from the Muslim Brotherhood's concept of the state, the ideology that they adapted for building a country, which is based on restoring the Islamic religious empire. Now, the Islamic religious empire, and I'll bet in the original Arabic, which I don't have and I'm not able to read very well, the Islamic religious empire, that means the Caliphate. So what Sisi is saying is that the Muslim Brotherhood was trying to use Egypt as a springboard to create the Caliphate, and that's really what I've just gone through, right? If you put together Tunisia, Libya, Syria, Iraq, with Egypt as the centerpiece and an attack on Ethiopia, and of course the Copts, the Christian Copts of Egypt being crushed in the process, that begins to look sort of like the Caliphate, doesn't it? You could suck Turkey into this. Various people would join it to try to dominate it, ups and downs and so forth. So the Islamic religious empire, this ought to be a red flag. Sisi is warning us that there's an attempt to restore the Caliphate. Take this seriously. He also goes on to say that the Muslim Brotherhood is not bound together by the idea of a nation or by patriotism, and it is not a sense of the country. It is only an ideology that is totally related to the concept of their organization, which that takes us back to the Islamic religious empire, i.e. the Caliphate. He is very angry, like most Egyptians, that the U.S. supported Morsi down to the very last minute. That goes for Susan Rice. That goes for Ambassador Ann Patterson, and the way they see it, Obama. Sure, Obama would have been happy to play Egypt against Syria. That is a typical Obama solution. Obama says, no, the U.S. will not attack Syria. Why should we attack Syria? We'll get Egypt to attack Syria. That's the Obama policy. And, of course, there are certain points where that is not quite as bad in terms of stopping it from it's easier to stop that than to stop the Pentagon once they get going, right? If the Pentagon got an order, it would probably happen. Or even there, you might be able to have counterweights. So the Egyptian military is not happy that they've been put under pressure by the U.S. And again, the Sisi is telling us that when you have 30 million people going into the streets, it's a free people who rebelled against unjust political rule, and this free people needs U.S. support. He says that Egypt was headed towards a civil war 4 months before the ouster of Morsi. General Sisi went to Morsi, he says, and told him this. He's on the telephone with Hagel every day. But see, the naive observer, and I've heard people say this, if Sisi is on the telephone with Hagel every day, it means that Sisi is a puppet of Hegel. No. Pretty dumb. That's connecto in the worst form, right? That is just unviable. So this is now the new reality. We got the new Egyptians in the field, and that's a new strategic reality. It's quite possibly the new Nasser, and there's nothing that the world needed more than a new Nasser, and maybe we'll get a new non-aligned movement in the process. Welcome back to the Webster Tarpley Program here on Unbound Radio. Now, the version that I've just given you is what I think is the most likely. There's also there would be an included version of that would have more focus, let's say, on Syria. And these fit together actually quite seamlessly. The thing that you've also got to look at are these jailbreaks. Right? This is actually quite remarkable. We've had a bunch of jailbreaks over the past 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Some of them quite big. In Iraq, the infamous Abu Ghraib has had a jailbreak there, and one other prison has had a jailbreak, and about 500 jihadis have escaped. Now, those would, in many cases, be Sunni types who would be quite congenial with the outlook of the Brotherhood, right? The Caliphate. Remember, the Shiite version of this is the Imam coming, not the same thing. When you hear Caliphate, it means the Sunni version, and that's essentially the version that the U.S. and the British have decided to support, of course, while they play it as an expendable puppet. They think, they hope, against the other side, right? It's the target, of course, for them is the Hezbollah, Syria, Alawite, Iran, and other related forces. At any rate, in Iraq, you had 2 jailbreaks, total 500 terrorists got out. In Libya, 1 big jailbreak, 1,200 terrorists. Wow. And in Pakistan, 200 terrorists out of a similar jailbreak. So this is almost 2,000 jihadis, right? These are terrorists, right? These are experienced fighters in many cases, right? Criminal energy types. And what are they going to be likely to do? Well, given their track record, they're going to gravitate someplace where there's a fight. Are they going to go to, say, are they going to go to Egypt to be in the Emirate of the North Sinai? Are they quite likely going to go to Syria? We're just noticing in the last couple of days here in Syria some, what can we say, some counterattacks by the retreating death squad forces, right? The death squads have been able to mount a small offensive in the Alawite area, Latakia. That's pretty much a port on the Mediterranean there. That's the Levant, right? That's the coastal emir calling the shots there for the rebels. So there's been that close to Assad's hometown. You can see it's chosen from the point of view of symbolism. And this morning we got news that the death squads have finally been able to take over a deserted military airfield in the north near Aleppo. And they had some wrecked helicopters on the landing strip there, which they lined up to make it look like, important military assets had been taken over by the rebels. So what are we to make of this? Look, think back to the U.S. Civil War, right? Think back to the autumn of 1864, let's say, the early autumn of 1864, when General Grant had Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia in a death grip in the trenches between Petersburg and Richmond, right? This was essentially a death grip from which Lee would never escape, ever. That was the end of him. He was in the death grip as of about July 1864, and when he left it, he was fleeing away from Richmond, and he had about a week more of operation. So that was a true death grip. I would say you might be able to think of the Syrian army operations in Homs and the Syrian army operations in Aleppo as the death grip on the terrorist forces. But go back to Lee. Even with the death grip, Lee was able to send General Early, let's say, up the Shenandoah Valley. He was able to get very close to capturing Washington, and was even able to go and burn Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. So shocking things, but they had very little impact on the overall strategic course. So look at it in that way, perhaps. Back in a minute on the Webster Tarpley Program. Welcome back to the Webster Tarpley Program here on World Crisis Radio. Sorry, the Webster Tarpley Program. Got it confused. You can follow all of my activities, all radio, all writing, all international TV, whatever it is. That's all on tarpley.net, and the immediate, breaking items, right? The urgent news of the day, that can be had at Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed. So I hope you'll take advantage of those resources. The thing we were just talking about is the question of the Caliphate. Remember, a lot of those forces are probably headed for Syria, right? So there might be an uptick in the Syrian, might be some small sort of symbolic actions by the Syrian rebels based on getting maybe 2,000, right? These 2,000 jihadis that we've just said. But remember, Early was able to threaten Washington. He was able to get to Fort Stevens here on Georgia Avenue, south of the Walter Reed Army Hospital, ex-hospital as it is today. He was able to break into Pennsylvania and burn the city of Chambersburg, but it didn't change the course of the war. And I would say that especially that thing, the Latakia attack in the Assad's Alawite zone, that is designed to be a symbolic action, probably by a suicide battalion, right? By people who figure that they're not going to get out of it, but they don't care. The other interesting thing, though, is the headline this morning: Al-Qaeda seizes Syrian airbase. Al-Qaeda seizes Syrian airbase because that's who did it. It was the Nusra people. It was in Nusra, and even more, the Islamic Emirate, because it's an emirate, the Islamic Emirate of Iraq and the Levant. They're the ones who took over that airfield there near Aleppo with the shot-up junked helicopters that they want you to see on TV. So what will Senator McCain say, right? Senator McCain and Lindsey Graham are mucking around in Egypt, popping off about, oh, it's a coup, it's a coup. Sorry, Senator, it's a counter coup. If somebody else is organizing a coup, then you have no choice but to organize a counter coup if you have the wherewithal. Certainly that's natural law. That's self-defense. Turnabout is fair play. Sauce for the goose, sauce for the gander. And that, I would say, is what General Sisi has done. So we welcome the evolution of General Sisi and his growing anti-imperialist profile. This interview in the Washington Post on Sunday, August 4th, that ought to be required reading for everybody, because there is the thing that the imperialists hate and fear. They're not afraid of the Muslim Brotherhood. They created the Muslim Brotherhood. The CIA has been in an alliance with the Muslim Brotherhood, lo, these many years. The head of the Muslim Brotherhood was received in a friendly way at the White House by President Eisenhower. My God, we had the Muslim Brotherhood here in Washington at the beginning of last year on a charm offensive. There is no problem with them. What they hate and fear is what you see them going after. And again, Assad, Gaddafi, people like this, General Qasem. I suppose you could even argue Saddam Hussein, although by this point it's gotten, the distortions have become primary and any positive element has become secondary. But you get the idea. And certainly in Turkey, right? Turkey, the Ergenekon trial, sure. There is, Gladio. Nobody tells you more about Gladio than me. Gladio is there, but the old question is who's doing what to whom and why now? And that seems to have something to do with the this offensive, right? That the Turkish army is supposed to be put back on its heels so that they won't dare do anything like General Sisi. I think Erdogan may be on thin ice when it comes to Ergenekon, if that's the correct pronunciation, which I suspect it's not. But a bunch of generals have been given long lifetime jail sentences for planning a coup against Erdogan when he came into power. So let's just switch gears here into domestic. The Congress is in recess. They left town last Friday under a cloud. It's too bad they didn't go before they shot off their last Parthian shot against Iran, right? They want to cut Iranian oil exports by 1 million barrels a day, and they actually wrote that into a law. Arrogance, overweening ambition. This is the pride which goeth ever before a fall, I'm afraid. And these imperialists are absolutely incorrigible. They're unreconstructed. It is notable that there are plenty of people, though, who want to buy Iranian oil, especially at good prices. And frankly, I don't see how this economic warfare strategy gets anywhere. Anyway, we're watching the new Iranian president with benevolent interest, as we did his predecessor. We would certainly want to counter the demonization of Ahmadinejad. He was a military man, a scientist. He was interested in economic, scientific, technological development. He was a nationalist. He was not in favor of the unbridled domination by the clergy, but rather some form of balance. And he was is an Iranian patriot. And I suspect we haven't heard the last from former President Ahmadinejad. But congratulations to the new Iranian President Rouhani. And again, we're hoping for more constructive steps from him, and I'm sure these will be forthcoming. Back to our domestic, though, since that was the Congress doing these things. The U.S. Congress, we've got the Mike Lee Mountain Meadows Massacre. That's my subliminal association. Whenever you hear Mike Lee, think Mountain Meadows Massacre. Senator Mike Lee, is Little Rand Paul, the facies hypocrita Ted Cruz, husband of Goldman Sachs, where his wife works. These characters, Rubio, the renegade Hispanic, they're all pushing this idea that the government should be shut down, that there should be a government shutdown on October 1st, followed by a government default sometime in October or November. Now, truly, the party of chaos and sabotage has never gone further. It could hardly be presented in sharper relief. This is the absolute negation of responsible programmatic government, because their alternative to all this is of course, nothing. Their rationale, of course, is that Obamacare is communism in the end of the world. I wonder why they say this. It's a very timid plan. It has nothing to do with a government takeover. I want a government takeover. I want Medicare for all. Everybody gets on Medicare for $100 per person per month. Hopefully voluntary, but if not voluntary, then some other way, right? With prodding, right? Enticements, whatever it is, right? Carrot and stick. Everybody needs to have health insurance in the modern world. The reason for this is clear. We're going to have to invest more and more years of education in each productive worker and other member of the labor force. As we invest more and more years of high quality, expensive education, it becomes imperative that these people live longer and longer lives, healthier and healthier lives, that they not be debilitated, that their vision, that their thinking processes, that their entire physical being should be enhanced to the maximum. This is where the interest of the individual meshes with the needs of economic development, right? There's nothing more benevolent than economic development correctly understood. We need people to live longer and longer and healthier lives. This is an imperative. Otherwise, you're going to succumb economically. And there's no way you can do this in any other form, because to make contributions, inventions at the level of modern science, you've got to have that kind of preparation. So we can't have people completing their PhD at 35 and dying at 55. No. They've got to live to be 85, 95, 105, whatever it is. And if they want to, work more. Right? That's fine. If they want to retire, they can do that too. But that sometimes is also a way to continue their activities. Anyway, a lot of these things are individual decisions. But you get the overall idea. Longer lives, healthier lives. Now, the Republicans, of course, are against this because they hate and fear the idea, which I hear the Democrats in the House, in the hearings I heard yesterday, they had the administrator of the Center for Medicare Services was grilled last week by the House. The Democratic members of Congress are talking more and more about the right to health care. The right to health care. Yes, that's it. Unfortunately, of course, the Obama plan is it's hard to see it as an embodiment of the right to health care, but it does take a step or two in that direction. And above all, if you're going to sell it in terms of a right to health care. As you popularize the right to health care, you've set the stage for bigger and better things to come. The Republicans, of course, it's socialism, it's communism, it's bankruptcy, it's the end of the world. They can't decide whether they want to sabotage it and complain about that, or whether they want to get on, which side they want to get on. But of course, the thing for sure is they will complain, and they will complain if the sun comes up. So there's nothing we can do about that except to destroy the Republican Party in place. Now, as long as this process was open, as you know, I was for Medicare for all. Once the process was completed, and it's either Obamacare or nothing, and once this has been approved by the Supreme Court and is now within measurable distance of being implemented, it becomes the rational policy to get inside it and fight to improve it, to move it in the direction of Medicare for all, to make it universal in that sense. The other argument, of course, is that since existing law guarantees everybody the right to treatment in an emergency room, it is not possible for certain people to stay outside and say, I don't need it. Some guy was on the radio this morning saying, I have savings, Rush. I have savings, and I'll pay for whatever I need. That's ridiculous. You have no idea. If you break your neck in a fall, your savings will be gone within a couple of weeks, and then it will be the collectivity that pays. So insurance has to be there. And by the way, that's not just yours truly here. We have a poll of young people, and this is the key group, of course, right? The people that would need to sign up for this. If you are between 26 and 30, 71% agree that it is very important to have insurance. If you're between 18 and 25, 77% agree that it's important to have health insurance. Of Americans, the entire U.S. population, 87% agree that it is important to have health insurance. Henry J. Kaiser Family Foundation, June 2013. So the big question is now, will the Republicans successfully sabotage, or will this be able to be enacted and then be susceptible to improvement, fighting from the inside to remove the rationing, the death panel, which is there, and make it better? So I'm for that second alternative. Not sabotage, but fighting with a reform agenda. Back in a minute. Welcome back to the Webster Tarpley Program here on Unbound Radio. Wrapping up our program for the 6th of August, 2013. Concerning this entire Obamacare thing, it's obviously a mixed bag. Howard Dean has written an interesting op-ed, I think, in the Wall Street Journal of all places, where he points out that the main negative element in Obamacare is the IPAB, Independent Payment Advisory Board, which is a healthcare rationing body, in Dean's opinion, destined to fail because it will deny people coverage. Okay, so that's one aspect. But there are other aspects. The most important, I think, is that people who have not been able to get any treatment because of these pre-existing conditions will have some ray of hope coming into their lives. So the obvious approach is fight to wipe out the IPAB. Repeal the Independent Payment Advisory Board. That will be a step towards avoiding any notion of healthcare rationing. Now, some basic things about Obamacare, since the lies are everywhere, the hysteria, especially libertarian radio. Oh my God, this has been an amazing season for lies and distortions. Essentially, the story is this. If you currently have a policy through a company, through a job, that is likely to remain the way it is. If it doesn't remain the way it is, remember that obviously the bosses the predators, the bloodsuckers, right, the malefactors of great wealth, the economic royalists, their temptation is to run wild in these coming months and blame it on Obamacare. In other words, they're convinced by the Republican Party that they can engage in colossal crimes and blame it, say, oh, I'm sorry, it's not my fault. Obama made me do it with Obamacare. I'm afraid not. There are a lot of things that are going on in the healthcare realm that are quite independent of Obamacare. Unfortunately, it is not a government takeover. Would that it were, in the way that I have described it, right? Medicare for all. This works through private insurance companies. And indeed, one of the critiques is that it's actually a bailout of private insurance companies who have damaged, bankrupted themselves in some cases through derivatives speculation. Okay, so if you have a job, that should basically remain the way it is. If you are on Medicare, that remains the way it is. There is a problem with Medicaid. The Obama plan wanted to expand Medicaid for the lowest income groups. Fascist Republican governors have sabotaged that. Take Rick Perry, right? Texas, oh, wonderful place. 1/4 of all people, 25%, have no health care. This is really a problem. But Perry doesn't care. Perry represents the moneyed power. So he says, no, we're not going to expand Medicare now because we might have to pay something for that later. So if you die, you can thank Governor Perry there in Texas. But this is a big area of fighting, right? That the Medicare expansion has to go through. Better yet, Medicare for all. The Medicaid expansion. I would overtake the Medicaid expansion with Medicare for all, which would take it out of the hands of demagogues like Perry. It would be a federal program with everybody having a right to it. But now the big question is, the Republicans say, oh, you're going to pay so much, you're going to get skinned alive by the premiums. Well, remember, of course, that if the premiums go up, the number one responsibility is with the private for-profit predatory insurance company that is doing it. Now, there are certain limitations on them with Obamacare, but there are not price controls, and there should be. There's another area. Fight for price controls in this so that the insurance company can make a reasonable return but not clean up. And now, of course, the most important. What's it going to cost? 3 states have said not what they think it's going to cost, but what it will cost. California, New York, Maryland. Those are the 3. Let's take California, right? The biggest sample and quite a representative one. Covered California says if you're a 40-year-old single person in the silver plan, right? There are different levels. There's catastrophic. There's bronze, silver, gold. If you want to get in the silver plan, sort of the lower middle, if you're a 40-year-old single person, you'd pay $300 a month. $3,600 a year. That compares with $5,500 per year through an employer-funded health plan. If you are poor, if you've got $17,000 a year, you want the silver policy, you would pay $700 a year. And if you want the bronze policy and you're earning $17,000, you get that for nothing. For nothing. If you're under 30, you can get a catastrophic plan for $150 a month. $1,800 a year. And if you're broke, you get a subsidy. You can go to the Kaiser Family Foundation, put in the general profile of your age, income, and so forth, and they'll tell you how much of a discount you're going to get on top of what I've just said. So this is not the apocalypse which the reactionaries have tried to portray. So if you're hanging on, tells you what it is. A transaction tax could make people think that they're going to be taxed on taking money out of their ATMs. No, and no. It's the Wall Street sales tax. It's Wall Street being forced to pay a sales tax. You know what a sales tax is because you pay it. Even this woman on Fox News in the past hour, I think her name is Kohn, K-O-H-N or something like this, she was able to put together that if you go out and buy a package of chewing gum, you will pay more sales tax on that pack of chewing gum than Wall Street pays in a year. Now, unfortunately, she couldn't quite pull herself together to say sales tax, but she did say you will pay more tax on that chewing gum than Wall Street pays in a year. But it's not on individual transactions. There is a $1 million exclusion, and that means every person can do $1 million of buying and selling, every person. Right? That means a family of 2 or 3, whatever it is, version. But that's not the version we're talking about here. Here we're talking about the blue-collar populist version, which is that money goes in to the U.S. Treasury, and it's available there for public use. And the main purpose is to prevent genocidal austerity cuts. So they have a little tape of Congressman Ellison, right, of Minnesota. I think he's the head or one of the heads of the Progressive Caucus of the Democratic Party. And he's giving a rap about what he calls the transaction tax. And he says the problem in the United States is there's plenty of money. It's just that the money is all in the wrong hands. Some of it needs to be transferred to the government. What could be more anodyne than that? What could be more bland, right? That if certain groups in the society have been getting away with murder, not paying their taxes, then they should pay them, right? A little bit like the nobility under the French Revolution pre-1789, right? They paid no tax, so change that, right? It's just equity. It's just fairness. But, of course, the panel of experts on the Fox News channel were all agreed that was communism, socialism, the end of the world, what have you. And it just goes to show. Now, again, the problems that we see with the transaction tax, the Robin Hood tax, whatever you want to call it, those are addressed in our proposal, right? Our proposal is much better. And we'll just give you a little outline of that in a minute when we return on the Webster Tarpley Program. Welcome back to the Webster Tarpley Program here on Unbound Radio. Again, it's the afternoon of Tuesday, the 6th of August, a little bit after 4 o'clock in the afternoon here in the East. Now, remember, the 100% acceptable version is called the Wall Street sales tax, the budget demolition, which is pursued by austerity ghouls, by reactionary Republicans, and by the Wall Street Democrats, of course, in their own way, a softer way, but sometimes more effective. We're going to be looking at these fights about austerity. This afternoon, just by coincidence maybe, we had a big freakout on Fox News channel on the America Live program. They have picked up a tape of Congressman Keith Ellison talking about a very timid, very mild version of the Wall Street sales tax, something that he calls the transaction tax. And the transaction tax, of course, is a minuscule amount. It's in the tenths of a percent. It's hardly noticeable. And unfortunately, the money is all earmarked for projects. I'm sure it's earmarked for the polar bears, the penguins, and the pelicans, and other such uses. Right? Give it all to the World Wildlife Fund, I guess, is the idea with their... Good afternoon. It is the afternoon of Tuesday, August 6th, and we hope that we're coming through to you this week on Unbound Radio. We're hoping for a confirmation that the sound is actually working in contrast to the previous week. I'm just going to take a wager that it is working. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C., making the best of things as much as I can, and hoping for confirmation. But if not, okay, let me just start off. As we go towards the autumn, the programmatic issues are going to come front and center. The fight against deadly austerity, the killer cuts the genocidal